Hi, my name's Doofy, Mr. Do if you're nasty, and this is the Doofy Doo talk through of Shiren the Wanderer, episode 16. This episode, we are going to start completing some of Faye's puzzles, and eventually we will have to finish all 50 of Faye's puzzles as a prereq to unlock the final puzzle. Most of these initial puzzles, at least, are pretty easy, although it is a good idea to go through them because they serve as a nice intro to some of the more advanced techniques, like firing around a corner. While I finish these puzzles as quickly as I can, I will begin talking about the second reason people play games. And remember last episode I said even if you have a vivid, dangerous, rewarding environment to explore, you need a satisfying way to interact with that environment. Which leads us to the need people have for a sense of control. And that is the second reason people play games, because they want to feel in control. Some people prefer to use the terms autonomy or agency when discussing this topic, depending on what area of academia they hail from, but I prefer the word control because it includes not only the sense of being in control, but the idea of the actual device you use to interact with the environment, the controller. And that need people have to feel that they're in control is one of the reasons that gaming is so appealing to teenagers. Of course, there are many adults like myself that also like gaming, but as a teen, if I can remember back that far, you often feel that life and events and even your own body are out of your control. So it's very comforting to enter that game world where you might not be omnipotent, but causes and effects and rules are transparent, and you feel like no matter what problem or challenge you encounter, you can overcome it. It is a controllable situation. Once again, the most interesting question to me is what qualities make for good control in a game? And we'll start with the obvious again. Control in a game is good if it provides you with consistent, satisfying feedback. And that seems obvious, but there's so many games that get this wrong. If there's an action that you do often in a game, it needs to have satisfying feedback, physical feedback from the buttons or whatever device you're using to interact with the game. Auditory feedback from the sound effects, visual feedback from the animation and the camera. It needs to be satisfying and consistent. A lot of times designers will use the term juicy. I remember in the original Metroid on the NES, that sound that the doors make when you shoot them, that is so satisfying. That is such a juicy, juicy sound effect. Sometimes I would just shoot the doors just to hear that whoop whoop sound. And the act of opening doors is literally and metaphorically the most important action in the game. So it was really essential that they nailed that feedback. Another obvious example that I have to bring up is jumping in Donkey Kong and Mario. That jump sound is iconic. And the feedback of, just slightly tapping the D-pad and changing your trajectory is really, really satisfying. In Shiren, as I said before, they added these sleeping animations. That's important feedback. It really makes a big improvement to this game. What are some of the other most important actions in the game of Shiren the Wanderer? Listening to text. There's a sound that accompanies the text that appears in the text boxes. And navigating the menus. All the sound effects when you're purse rummaging in Shiren are satisfying. There's immediate feedback to all of your actions. One of the most subtle changes is that every sword in this remake has its own sound. So if you listen to the sound of the Minotaur axe when you swing it, you can really feel the weight and the power as opposed to something like the Air Slayer that sounds very light and has a little twinkle. The sound of stepping on a trap, that little click, no matter if it goes off or it doesn't, that is satisfying feedback. That gives you that sense just for like a quarter of a second, like, oh god, what did I just do? And I know you can check underfoot and manually trip traps to get 100% trip rate, but I like to step off and step back on as kind of sort of a gambling just to see if it'll work, because it leads to some funny situations in these puzzles. Now, you might be thinking, hey Doofy, that contradicts what you were talking about. You said controls had to be consistent, that feedback had to be consistent. Well, that's a good observation, and we will discuss that more when we get to the third reason people play games. But for now, we'll set that aside, and I'll just say that a little bit of unpredictability sometimes in your feedback can be a good thing. Thinking about games that have really juicy, satisfying, consistent feedback, my thoughts immediately go to the original Street Fighter II. And I grew up playing a lot of 2D fighters. When I was a kid, every grocery store and 7-Eleven had at least one, sometimes two, Street Fighter II cabinets. And there was always a big line of kids ready to play. Street Fighter II has one of the most elegant control schemes of any game I've ever played. It's a game that kickstarted an entire genre, a genre that seems to be slowly dying as it concentrates on the needs of an increasingly misogynistic, dogmatic, and insular fanbase. But that's a rant for another day. Back in the day, Street Fighter II had a pretty broad appeal, and one of the reasons it was such a revelation is the satisfying, juicy feedback to all the moves. Every single strength attack had its own sound when it whiffed and it hit. And in particular, the fierce punch sounded like the mightiest whip in the universe when it hit. It was like whoosh. And I remember in Super Street Fighter 2, for some reason, the first punch sound got downgraded. It was like a snare drum, like whoosh. That always really turned me off. Luckily, there was another feedback innovation in Super Street Fighter 2, the combo counter, that found its way into a lot of other genres, including the puzzle genre. Another feedback trend set by Street Fighter 2, borrowed from manga, is the idea of yelling out the special move you're doing, which is pretty funny if you think about it applied to real life. If I had more time, it would be interesting to analyze why that feedback device is so satisfying. But we will not do that here. No, I forgot how this puzzle works. Hey guys. Stepping on a landmine. In what game do you intentionally step on a landmine to kill the enemies? Can you imagine in Metal Gear Solid? And they're like, Snake, step on the landmine to destroy the tank. Let's see if I can get it this time. Hey guys, can we talk this over? Or maybe I'll do this. Shazam! I just imagine Shiren lying on the ground with his legs blown off. I showed those guys. Let me just rub this leaf on my stump till my leg grows back. This game is completely nuts. I love it. Alright, I better start paying a little bit more attention to these puzzles. Let's see what this one is. Oh, this puzzle is easy. It does introduce the most overpowered item in the entire game though, the Armband of Sight. It doesn't help me because I turned off the map overlay, but the Armband of Sight lets you see all of the enemies on the floor, and it doesn't show up in a lot of other roguelikes analogous items to the Armband of Sight because it is so overpowered. I think the only time I ever beat Faith's final puzzle without finding a strengthening jar was the time when I had the Armband of Sight pretty early, so I was able to avoid most of the enemies. Really, the only thing that can kill you once you have an Armband of Sight is just a horrible starting situation or a couple monster houses in a row. Alright, I don't really remember where the stairs are on this floor. It's important to know. Oh, there they are. Alright, look at the field bandit. It's like, I've been waiting for you forever, man. Got any weed? Alright, where was I in my control discussion before I got interrupted by my body being disintegrated by a mine? Oh yeah, Fierce Punch in Super Street Fighter 2. I have a similar complaint that I referenced before about the sound of landing an attack in Shiren 3 for the Wii. The sound is just not satisfying. That feedback is not juicy at all. The animation is sluggish instead of punchy and immediate. That's one reason that 2D games from this era really excel over their 3D counterparts, that punchiness of the animation. But satisfying, consistent, immediate feedback is just the first quality of good control. We'll talk about the second quality, which is a bit more nebulous, next time on Shiren the Wanderer. Gamers of the world today, are you looking for a smarter way to play? Come be a part of the roguelike nation.
Let me just rub this leaf on my stump till my leg grows back.